Now we're into the part of your workflow that people generally consider photoshopping. Adjusting and correcting images is nothing new. It's been a standard practice for all photographers going back to the beginning of photography. Sometimes people will speak of an image as being unedited or uncorrected, implying that there's some kind of objective, unadulterated truth to be had in a photograph. But there's no such thing in photography. All images are edited. Even if the photographer hasn't done it themselves, the camera has, as it has decoded its data according to engineering decisions made by its designers. All images are edited. Some are edited more than others, and at this stage in your workflow, you have the choice to perform a vast array of adjustments and edits. Sometimes we adjust images to fix problems, exposure or compensation problems, for example. Sometimes we adjust images because the idea that we had when we were shooting wasn't good enough, and we need some additional digital edits to make the image work. Sometimes we know when we shoot that we'll want to apply certain edits. For example, maybe you can't get the image framed the way you want it, so you shoot with the expectation of cropping it later, or perhaps you build a composition around a shadow with the idea of plunging the shadow into much deeper darkness later. These are ways that we finish an image through editing. No matter which image editor you choose, it's best to perform your edits in a particular order, and I'll explain the reasoning behind each one as we go. So here I am in Lightroom. I have some images. I'm going to start with this one right here. I'm going into the Develop module, which I can get to by clicking up here. One thing about Lightroom is it can really be driven by the keyboard. It's great. It's best to learn all the keyboard shortcuts. You can move much faster. So this is an image I shot actually out of a car window while I was moving. So the color's a little weird, and it's tough to compose that way. And it's not a great shot, but it could be if I recomposed it, and that's what cropping is for. Cropping and straightening are the first steps you're going to take in your image editing workflow for a couple of different reasons. In this case, I need to crop the image first because I shot it with the idea of cropping it. I knew that I didn't have a long enough lens to get the composition that I wanted, so I need to crop the image to finish it, basically. I crop first because if I can't get the crop right, there's no reason to do any other edits. One of the reasons I've built my image editing workflow the way I have is to try to eliminate images as quickly as possible so that I don't waste time on them. So if they have certain problems, I want to know that up front. Finally, there's another reason that we crop that's a little technical, but it has to do with this thing up here called the histogram, which is a readout of data based on the tones that are in my image, and I need this to be as accurate as possible before I move on to other edits. And for it to be accurate for a cropped image, I need the image cropped. Most image editors provide a crop tool that works in some variation of the way that Lightroom's does. I can drag to crop from different directions. I can crop from the corners. I can crop from the edges. I can also constrain the crop to a particular aspect ratio. Aspect ratio is the ratio of the width to the height. So I can choose to keep my original aspect ratio. I can go to square or any of these other standard aspect ratios. I'm actually going to crop this to a square, so I'm going to pick that, and it gives me a suggested crop right away. What I'm thinking about here is there's just a lot of extra stuff in this image. I don't need this big shrub here. I don't need all this stuff on the side. I really saw the road as the center of the composition, so I'm going to move my crop around here, try to get rid of some of this other stuff. And what's amazing about the crop tool is it doesn't seem that technically sophisticated. I'm looking now at this extra space above the clouds. I don't think I need that. I can pull this right in here. The crop tool doesn't look that sophisticated technically, but what it's allowing me to do is completely recompose my image, change the relationships of the things in the image to each other. This grid is here to indicate where thirds are. You may have already learned the rule of thirds. And I hate to call it a rule because it's not something you should follow all the time. Sometimes thirds are a good way to compose your image. In a square image, we typically consider the corners, making sure that corners are balanced. So I think my crop is probably going to be right in here somewhere. So I'm just going to double click on my image, and there's my new cropped image. So I've managed to crop out a lot of extra stuff from this image. I've really made it about the road. There's nothing else distracting. I've greatly simplified the image. So that's the power of the crop tool. All image editors have one. Something else I might need to do is straighten. Here's an example of an image that's a little crooked, I can tell because of the horizon. And so I can go up here again to my crop tool and just grab a straighten tool. This is a fairly common tool in a lot of image editors now. I drag out a line that indicates something in the image that's supposed to be horizontal. It's very subtle here, and I don't know if you can see it at the small size you're watching. It rotated the image a little bit and cropped in on it to make up for the fact that the image was no longer square. Next thing I would do is red eye or spot removal. Red eye is that thing you get in flash pictures where people have these red, creepy looking eyes. Spot removal is the process of removing sensor dust or maybe debris on the camera. This image has it pretty bad. It's these things up here. Again, I do this early in my workflow because if I can't remove spots, it might be that the image is lost. So I don't want to bother fixing contrast and color, only to find that I can't really use the image because there's some spot that I can't get rid of. There are a lot of different spot removal tools in different applications. Lightroom's is very easy to use. I have this thing here, which I set to a particular size. I click, and what it's doing is it's copying data from here into here, and that's making the spot go away. So I'm just going through and finding all the different spots. Other programs do have spot removal tools that work more like brushes. You have to paint them on. One thing that can be difficult is actually seeing the spots. If they're very faint, the way you find them is to not look directly at them. If you think you see a spot somewhere in the image, get your eyes in the general vicinity of it and then avert your eyes and you'll probably find them a little better. There's some faint ones in here. I can actually use this for more than getting rid of sensor dust. Sensor dust is stuff that gets inside the camera and gets on the image sensor. I don't really like that sailboat on the horizon, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm not crazy about that little boat there, so I'm going to get rid of that. So in this case, I'm using it for more than just spots. This is a good way of removing small, pointy objects. I don't mean with points, but like point-sized objects in the image. So you might think, well, I can't tell if you remove spots or not. There's all those circles all over the place. If I unselect the tool, they go away, and now you can see that the image is much cleaner. It looks like I missed one right there, but I'll go back and pick that up later. I'm going to go back to our other image for the next step. What I've done now is I've gone through all the geometric things that I would need to adjust. Cropping, straightening. If I needed to correct perspective, if I was looking up at a building and the lines were receding in the wrong direction, I could correct that. That's another geometric adjustment. I've gone through all the geometric adjustments. I've gone through the spotting. Those are things that can kill an image. I want them out of the way early before I waste time on other things. So I'm feeling pretty good about this image right now. I've taken care of some problems on these two images. The next thing I would do is move through white balance adjustment. White balance, as you should have already learned on your camera, is the process of calibrating your camera for the color of the light that you're shooting in. If white balance is off, the color in your image will be bad. I was shooting through a tinted window here, so the color's a little weird. There's no way I'm going to get it perfectly accurate, but I would like it to be a little less yellow, and yet I still want it to be kind of warm. I have white balance tools here in Lightroom, these ones that say temperature and tint. Those are standard terms for white balance. You might actually, in an image editor, see a tool labeled white balance. In most image editors, you have a dropper that lets you click on something that's gray, and that automatically adjusts white balance. I like this better. You don't have to go for correct color. You can go for some subjective idea of just warmer or cooler that you like. I like this color. Again, I'm doing this early because particularly in an image with a really bad white balance problem, if I can't get it to where I want it, I would give up on the image and not waste any more time. Another thing that I might do at this step is black and white conversion. Digital cameras always shoot color, but if we want to work in black and white, we have to shoot color and then convert to black and white later. I would do that at this step to see if I like the black and white adjustment that I got. And then from there, I would move on to the next things, just like I'm doing now. The next step I'm going to do here is contrast adjustment. Contrast is the range of black to white in the image, and it's critical that that be set properly to get good contrast, particularly if you're printing. Another thing about contrast adjustment is a lot of times if you get contrast set properly, all your colors fall into place. So I do contrast adjustment before any other color correction because this next step might fix color problems. This image doesn't really have color problems, all the colors off because I was shooting through a window. This might be an image to try in black and white, but I'm going to keep it in color. And what I'm going to do here is just use these controls over here in Lightroom to dial some more contrast into a few different places. I'm working on the sky at this point, just bringing more detail in by making the lighter areas of the image more contrasty. Now I'm going to work on the shadow areas to get them a little bit stronger. The next thing I would like to do is improve the contrast just in the lower half of the image, and Lightroom has a few tools for doing localized adjustments to contrast. This is adjusting contrast on a gradient, and it's a nice way of pulling more contrast into just one area while ramping off that adjustment into others so that the edit is not so noticeable. I think I'm also going to bring the saturation down a little bit on the lower half of the image. And now what I've got is here's before and here's after. You can see the effects of both my white balance correction and this contrast adjustment. The image has a lot more punch now. Let's do one more so you can see again the power of contrast adjustment here. This image that we removed the spots from has pretty weak contrast, so I'm just going to use these tools over here. These are sliders that allow me to adjust the brightness of different areas of the range of tones in my image. I can work on the highlight areas, the shadow areas, the mid-tone areas, and by moving these around I can put more contrast into specific places. This looks better. It's a lot more saturated now, and this is what I'm talking about. By adjusting contrast, the color in this image is now much better. So I've also revealed more sensor dust that I'm going to have to take out. I can go back and do that later, and that's very often how it is. I'm saying that there's this order of steps you need to go in, but you sometimes have to go back to previous steps. Sometimes you just don't notice something until later, or one edit will bring out a problem that you couldn't see before. Next, I would go on to color correction. In this case, contrast correction fixed my color, so I don't have anything to do here. Let's go back to this other image. There might be some color correction things I would want to play with here. Lightroom is set up with this stack of image editing controls over here. You can see basic, tone curve, HSL color, black and white. I'm going to open that up, and here I have some color controls. I'm not really sure what I want to do to the color in this image. It seems a little too yellow to me. So I'm going to use some of these tones, or some of these controls, to try and pull some of that yellow out. That's making it look still a little weird, just because the color in this image is weird, but that looks more like maybe a field of wildflowers than just bad color in an image. So I've got all of these tools over here for adjusting color, and as you can see, I can adjust very particular ranges of color. There are a number of other tools here in the stack of edits that Lightroom provides. Not all of them are color and contrast. Some have to do with sharpness, correcting lens problems, applying special effects, and that sort of thing. That would be the next step in my workflow. This is why the Lightroom tools are arranged in this order. You can see that they are going in the order that I have said is the order we need to go in. And that's because over years of working with editors, we've all kind of figured out, oh, there's a particular order that you should use. So whatever editor you're in, you should be working in this order that I'm talking about. Lightroom is very nice that it sets them up for you this way. What would come next would be compositing, other special effects kinds of things that I might want to do. Lightroom does not have compositing tools. It doesn't have a lot of effects sort of tools. And for a straight ahead landscape image like this, there's not a lot of stuff that I would need to do like that. But what that might include is maybe I want to get rid of the telephone poles, something like that. Maybe I want to add a UFO in the sky or something like that. That would all come at this step. Those are the most labor-intensive editing steps, and that's why they're way down at the bottom of the workflow. I want to be sure that everything else is working well before I go to the trouble of trying to figure out how to put a UFO into this picture. I'm going to do one quick little effect here. I'm going to add a bit of vignetting to the image. Vignetting is a darkening or lightening in the corners. I'm going to darken the corners a little bit. I don't want it to be really noticeable, but by darkening the corners, I bring more focus to the center of the image. In a square image, a vignette works really well because it helps our eye know what to do in the face of this otherwise uniform geometry. And I think that's pretty much it for this image. Here again is before. I've taken this kind of blah rectangular shot out a car window and recomposed it, done some image correction, and really given it a lot more punch and focus. So after this, if I was going to output the image in some way, either for the web or a social media site or for printing, I would go through a few more steps in this order. I would size the image, I would sharpen the image, and then I would go through my output step. We're not going to talk about sizing and sharpening in this course. Those are pretty advanced topics, but you can learn about them in other courses in the library where we talk about specific types of output. And later in this course, we're going to look at a very high-level overview of Lightroom's output options.